start at the beginning and tell us where you were born and when.
Well, I was born in Leeds, 1902, July 20th, 1902. Uh,
And where were you christened? What was
I
the
was,
christening?
I was, my full name is Lorna Margaret Brown Edwards, and I was christened in a socialist Sunday school.
And can you tell something about that?
Well, it was in a rather shabby little room, as far as I remember, with a piano in it. That's all it was. And the piano wasn't paid for. They were appealing for funds for the piano. And a cousin of mine made the remark that the socialists said money didn't matter, but they were always appealing for it.
Something's ever changed. Say something about your parents.
Well, they were very active in what was then a very out left movement, the ILP. Really, it was more the Clarion Vocal Union they were concerned with, and they belonged to the Clarion Vocal Union and used to sing in the choir, and they went on picnics with the bicycles, and Mother was one of the first people to ride a bicycle, and of course they used to have to tuck their skirts up, their very long skirts, and she always used to tell me that there were people used to shout after her, "Come off, you braznozzy," because it wasn't approved of course, then, for women to ride bicycles.
What did your father do?
He was a jeweller and had a small shop in Dewsbury Road in Leeds, and he had an apprentice called Arthur.
And we'll come back to him, but say a bit about your grandparents first.
My grandparents, well, they originated in Home Firth, the land of the summer wine, and they went to America but they left their eldest child. They had, I think Auntie Lorna was born then. She wasn't born in America. So they had at least one child with them when they went, and they were there in America 11 years, and my mother was born there. But my grandmother heard that her mother was ill, and my grandfather had just sold a patent. He was rather good at inventing things, and she said, "Let's go home, lad." And so they came back.
Right. And that was on your mother's side?
Yes, that was my mother's father and mother.
And they were called?
Bailey.
And on your father's side, the Edwards side, tell us about...
Well, my father was apprenticed to, that's how he became a jeweller. My father's second wife had some relatives who had a jewellers they were jewellers in Ashton-under-Lyne, and my father was apprenticed to them, my father and his brother. And I think he mustn't have been their uncle or whoever he was, mustn't have been a very good businessman, because he used to go off and, my father said that he used to go off fishing and leave the apprentices to look after the business.
I think that still happens as well. Look, coming back to Leeds, do you have any memories of Leeds?
Not really, not very much.
We've got this photograph here of the Leeds Clarion Vocal Union.
Yes, well, that was
in Roundhay Park.
Yes, well, I do remember Roundhay Park, which of course I've been there since. It's a lovely park, and they used to. Of course, it was much further out of Leeds than it would seem to be now, because there weren't any means of getting there except by well, I suppose, were there trams in those days? Oh, well, there were trams, because I remember being in a tram in Leeds when I was a little girl, and mother telling me to shut my mouth because otherwise I should get flies in it. Yes, it's a lovely park, and I used to love to go there.
This is obviously a big crowd that are singing in this choir.
Yes.
What kind of people came into the house?
Well, I don't remember the people. I suppose I was in bed mostly when they came, because they'd come in the evening, I suppose, mostly. The only people I do remember are the people from the Brotherhood, those Christian socialists that I told you about. They were rather peculiar people, but very nice people. They used to wear sandals, and in the days when nobody wore sandals, they wore them all the time. And they had some sort of, I think, my parents always thought they had some trust funds somewhere that their parents had put away for them, because they didn't have to earn their own livings entirely, but they did eke out what they had by knitting on knitting machines, and we used to have to wear their proceeds, and they were very rough, long woolly stockings which we had to wear, and we didn't like them at all because they used to scratch our skins, and we used to say they were jammy because they tickled us and felt sticky.
Do you have any other memories of being sort of different or being sort of left out because your parents were socialists?
Well, not in Leeds, of course, but when we got to Slathwaite, we did feel very alienated because we didn't go to Sunday school, and we didn't have Sunday clothes like everybody else did. We used to wear the same clothes as we went to school in, and we used to go picnics on Sunday, which nobody did in those days.
Why was that?
Well, because they all went to Sunday school, and it wasn't done to go picnics on Sunday.
So, when did you move to Slathwaite, and why?
Well, we moved when I should think about just over 5, because it was when Muriel I was 3.5 years older than Muriel, and she was 9 months old when I had pneumonia and nearly died. And as I told you, the doctor's little girl had the pneumonia at the same time, and she died. And so the doctor came to my parents and said, well, I've lost my little girl, but I'll try and save yours. And he did save me, or at least he helped. And it was one of the Brotherhood who helped my parents. They used to sit up with people who were ill in those days. And Lillian, who was one of the Brotherhood, used to come and sit up with me, and she helped my mother a great deal in pulling me through. And I had to have my hair cut after that's why they took that photograph of me before I had my hair, because they cut my hair short. And then the doctor said that my parents must move from Leeds because of the air pollution, because otherwise they wouldn't rear me. So they set about looking for businesses. And I have a very clear memory of going to a place, I think it was Saltburn, somewhere near Grimsby, isn't it, on the east coast. And it was a very grey, horrible day. And Mother said to me, "Shall we come here, love?" And I said no. So we didn't go.
Right, so you went to Slathwaite?
Slathwaite, yes. Slowit.
Slowit. And there you lived did you live above the shop or next to the shop?
No. The Conservative Club was above the shop, which was something of a constraint for my parents because they were tenants of the Conservative Club. And but of course they didn't take any active part in politics at all after they left Leeds.
Why was that?
Well, partly because they were a bit fed up with the ILP, and partly because they were too busy. They'd borrowed money to buy this shop, this much bigger shop than the one in Leeds, and they felt, and it was from my great aunts, their aunts, my mother's aunts, that they'd borrowed the money, and they felt they had to work very hard to pay it back.
And how was life in Slough? I mean, what did you have friends? What sort of neighbours did you have? What did you wear?
Well, there's one thing I do remember. We didn't wear shawls, but and we didn't wear clogs, but all the other children used to wear clogs, and I used to wish we could wear clogs because you could slide in the schoolyard and make sparks with the clogs when you were sliding. But of course we weren't allowed to wear clogs. There were only about, I should think, half a dozen of us that didn't have clogs. They all used to wear them, and the ordinary people in the mills, up to the First World War.
So you wore your clogs, or you didn't wear clogs?
No, I didn't wear clogs. And all the women who went to the mill used to wear shawls during the week. They never wore coats, ordinary coats, just shawls and clogs, of course. And just wore ordinary clothes at weekends. And they had Saturday clothes and Sunday clothes. They used to wear their very best clothes on Sunday and their next best clothes on Saturday. And but just any old thing to go to the mill.
And say a bit more about Slathwaite, how big it was and how prosperous.
Well, the population, as far as I remember, was about 5,000. And of course it was 5 miles from Huddersfield, but people didn't go into Huddersfield to shop. They used to stay in Slathwaite. Although there were trams in those days, but they didn't go right up to Marsden. They stopped at Slathwaite. I remember, I think it was probably about 1912 when the first tram went up to Marsden. That was quite an event. Which Marsden is a village just further up the valley, at the head of the valley. And
what about your memories of schooling?
School? Well, it was just an ordinary boarding school. And one thing I do remember is at election times, the little boys all used to wear little yellow rosettes. It was a Liberal constituency at that time. And the little boys all had little yellow rosettes and used to shout and yell, of course, in support of the Liberal candidate. And during you asked me whether we felt very restrained at school, but I don't ever remember. I used to enjoy school, and particularly during rainy playtimes, we used to dance in the main hall of the school.
Was there no corporal punishment?
Well, I don't, not for the girls. I think the boys got caned now and again. And the big boys used to work half time. The ones in the top class used to go to work in the mill 3 days. I think well, they were called half-timers, so I expect they did 3 days in the mill and 3 days at school, or 2.5 days at school, or 2.5 days in the mill, or 3 days at school, but I don't know exactly, but that was the arrangement. And of course they seemed very big boys to me, but they would be 12, only about 12, I expect.
Whilst you were at Slathwaite at school, there was the famous by-election.
Oh yes, when Victor Grayson got in, one of the first. Well, was he the first Labour? He wasn't the first Labour MP.
He was the first
was he?
independent socialist MP.
Yes, and there was great excitement. I remember being taken to the town hall, which was just a big house. It was, of course, a small place, and he came to the window, and my parents had known him personally when they were in Leeds, but I don't think they renewed their contacts with him then. But and he slept at our house the night before he was married to Ethel Anakin.
That's not Victor Grayson. You're mixing Grayson up now with Snowden. It was
No.
Oh
yes. It was Victor Grayson was it was Philip Snowden they knew, not Victor Grayson. I'm sorry about that.
When you were in Slathwaite, your parents weren't politically active, but they did read the Clarion.
What?
They did read the Clarion.
Oh yes, and later on, I belonged to the. They had the Clarion Round Table. That was it. The Clarion. I think it was a Clarion Round Table. Anyhow, it was the youth club of the Clarion, and I belonged to that. And that was how I got my first trip to Germany. It was some youth organisation in London connected with the Clarion Round Table that arranged it, and it cost me exactly £6.
But that would have been after the war.
Oh yes,
that would be after you left school.
Oh well, that was in 1929, I should think. 1927.
27. Going back to before the First War. The years up to the First War were known as the Great Unrest. It was a period when there were a lot of major strikes and unemployed, unskilled workers started to organise themselves in trade unions for the first time. Did that affect Slathwaite at all?
Well, I don't really know about that. But I do remember there was a gold strike.
Coal strike.
And I think I told you I remember them cutting trees down. And of course we hadn't many trees in the Colne Valley. It was rather a windswept valley. And so I felt upset. Particularly, there was one tree that I used to see from my bedroom window that they cut down for firewood. And I remember I was very distressed, although I was only have been about 9 or 10. And there was a train strike too, almost about the same time. I don't just remember when.
Say a bit about family life. Were you a good child?
Oh, I'm afraid I was. I remember an aunt of mine saying, "She's too good to be true." I must have been an awful child.
And how about Muriel, your sister?
Oh, she was naughty. I used to have to go and she used to wander off, like Ellie would if she got a chance. And I used to have to go out and fetch her and find her. I used to go off on my own when I was at school because we had a teacher who was very keen on botany, and I used to go out and get specimens. I shouldn't be allowed to do now because I would only be about 7 or 8. And I used to go quite a long way, a mile or so, out into the country, gathering specimens. And I remember taking back you have those flowering trees out at the back. And the reason I know that they're Gelder rose, is because I remember finding a tree, a blossoming tree, on the edge of a field and thinking how wonderful it was that it wasn't in a garden, and taking a piece to my teacher. And she told me that it was a Gelder rose.
And is that the origin of your interest in gardening?
Well, no, not quite, because I remember that when we moved to a bigger house, as we did eventually, we had a garden, and my father was quite keen on gardening at that time, though it was mainly because he liked radishes and could grow radishes. And I wasn't at all interested. No, it was later on when I got a garden on my own that I became garden conscious. I wasn't even when we lived at Meltham, where we had a lovely garden.
So, when you were born in 1902, when you were 12, the First World War started.
Yes.
How did that affect Slathwaite, and how did it affect your family and yourself?
Well, of course, I just started going to Huddersfield to school, and I used to go on the train, and the trains were always late, although they were privately owned at that time. And of course, the mills were very busy, and there were a lot of mills burnt down. It was amazing the number of mills that were burnt down during the war. I don't know whether it was because they were working at full speed and making khaki cloth, which of course they were for the troops. But there was nearly all. I well remember it. There was a phenomenal number of mills burnt down at that time, and
how did the war affect you?
Well, very, very little, really. Very little. I don't think you could find a family that the war affected least. Although I remember queuing up for food because they didn't have food rationing, you see, not at first anyhow, and feeling and nearly fainting in a food queue, because my mother used to work in the shop, and I used to have to do the queuing. I suppose it must have been on Saturday when I wasn't at school, and treacle was a real luxury. And then we had an uncle who had a manure manufacturing business, and he had a sort of small holding outside, and they kept a cow and a few pigs and so on, and we were able to, and he used to bring us a side of ham to hang up on the ceiling, and of course that was absolutely wonderful because food was very, very short. And I remember my father going to the doorstep and saying, "I'll let the neighbours know that to sharpen the carving knife. I'll let the neighbours know that we've got some meat to carve." And it was wonderful to have this side of ham hanging up on the ceiling, and we could get some meat from it. Because, as I say, food really was short, much, much shorter than I remember it being during the Second World War. I mean, we had enough, or at least we hadn't enough, but we got by during the Second World War, but we really almost went hungry during the First World War at times. course, I was just at a very hungry stage, about 12 to 14, 12 to 16, it would be, wouldn't it?
Yes. Your father was a socialist. What?
Well, he started buying the Daily Mail during the war, as I told you, and because he said it got the best war news at the time, and and of course he was very ambivalent about the war. Ideologically, he didn't approve of it, but he felt he ought to have been joined up. Although he was in his 40s, and he did join. He was what they called a Derby man. I don't know. It was a scheme by Lord Derby, a sort of part-time soldier, and he did join those, but he would never be an officer. They wanted him to be, but he wouldn't. And a friend of ours was an officer in the real army because he'd been a territorial, and he had what they called shell shock. You never heard of that in the Second World War, but there were a lot of people suffered from what they called shell shock in the First World War. And of course, I think they had a dreadful time. Another thing I remember is they used to train people on the moors, and I remember they used to train soldiers on the moors, and 1,000 people, the troops, all filed past the house, and I remember thinking what an enormous number 1,000 was, because they said there were 1,000 people, 1,000 soldiers just marched past. And it took what I thought was a very, very long time to see all these soldiers pass by. Another thing I remember is people used to come back from the front, all muddied up to the eyes. I remember seeing some soldiers in the tram going up the stairs, and how muddy with their boots were from being in the trenches in Flanders.
By the time the war finished, you had left school. You left school at 15?
Yes. I went to the technical college later for a year. They did a special course for me, as I told you.
What did you do when you left school?
I went into the shop because I decided I wouldn't be a teacher, and they didn't quite know what to do with me. So my father was an optician as well as a jeweler, because in those days it was opticians were either opticians and jewelers and opticians, or chemists and opticians. There were very few who were mainly opticians. And I decided I would be an optician. And they had the school I went to, the secondary school, was rather an untypical one, and they did arrange a special course for me where I used to take physics with the boys, and special lessons in light. And then, of course, when I went to the tech, I took light, and there were no special courses. I know they have special courses at technical colleges for opticians these days, but in those days nobody. And I had to take, when I came to take the exams, I had to take a correspondence course. But I had done a lot of light at the technical college, and I had to do a course, of course, and it was light and electricity and heat, light and electricity, and and then the correspondence course.
Did the family manage to have much relaxation? Did they get away on holiday?
Well, they had to go separately because, of course, they didn't have any staff, you see. They had a thing about employing people. They being socialists, in those days, socialists thought if you employed people, you exploited them, which isn't true, of course, but necessarily.
No.
But they thought that. And so they had a very strong feeling, even about help in the house. And we used to have maids now and again, but they always had very ambivalent feelings about it. And so they had to go separately on holiday. Mother used to go, and Dad used to go.
We have this photograph here of you on holiday in Caister.
Yes.
Tell us something about Caister.
Well, Caister was a socialist holiday camp. It was the precursor of these terrible now what do they call them? Butlins camp these days. But of course it wasn't like that at all. Although the camps we slept in tents, or I think even then they had some chalets, but we slept in tents, and we made our own activities. There was a socials committee, and we had we always went a trip to the Broads, and that's the photograph of a party on the Broads, and
can you remember any of the people you met at Caister?
Well, Muriel met her husband there.
Yes.
Well, but she was on holiday with my dad at that time, and my future brother-in-law was a very attractive young man, that very witty. He charmed my father. He was very witty, and very entertaining.
What did you think of him?
Well, I didn't know him at that time because I wasn't there. I expect I must have gone on holiday with, although I wasn't there at the time that Muriel met my father, my brother-in-law. But yes, as I say, and we used to have fancy dress arrangements, of course, and you hadn't to spend more than a certain amount. I expect they still have them at holiday camps, but I don't know. But what you wouldn't have was that they used to sing the Red Flag down again.
This photograph is taken in 1921, which was a time of great upheaval across Europe. The Russian Revolution was in full swing, and there'd been revolutions in Germany and other places. Do you remember people talking politics? Socialist politics?
Well, I expect they did, but I don't remember particularly. No.
Your studies were sort of...
Yes, I was busy studying, and we never... You see, they weren't actually active in political life at all, but we were always very conscious as a family what was going on in the world, except that Muriel wasn't. That's my sister, because it was a family joke that when she was 18 she didn't know who the Prime Minister was. and in a politically minded family that was dreadful. But of course she was at school and very busy doing her matric and so on. And of course I was busy studying for the optical exams.
So, when you were studying to become an optician, could you say a bit about how you did it?
Well, I used to study when I was at Thomas Armstrong's in Manchester. I used to go upstairs, and I had there wasn't a really good light, so I had to use an oil lamp. It was just a gas burner with no. It didn't really give any more light than a Bunsen burner, and so I used to have this oil lamp on the table, and a sheet from the oven to keep my feet warm, and a rug around my legs. And I used to study on my own. Oh, and I went to the Manchester Technical College, the one in Oxford Road. I had a course in optical benchwork there. Yes, I'd forgotten that.
And where did you stay when you were?
I stayed with an old friend of my mother's, who had been left a widow, and I stayed there during the week and used to go home at weekends. And they used to tease me, and because I used to have to get up very early for the train on Monday morning. And I remember I used to be in a little workshop at Thomas Armstrong's. I went there because I thought that I'd better get away from my parents, because Dad and I didn't get on all that well together, and especially if he was teaching me. So I thought I would better get some practical experience in another shop. And so, of course, I went to Thomas Armstrong. They arranged for me to go to Thomas Armstrong's and Brothers in Deansgate, and I was there about 18 months when I was 18, and because I couldn't take the exams, I think I took a preliminary exam when I was 18, but I'm not sure about that. And then I took the final exams when I was 21. But I was studying all the time I was in Manchester. It was a correspondence course I had to do, because, as I say, there were no special optical courses, although I did take this course in optical benchwork at the Manchester Tech College of Technology. You missed it. It is now, isn't it?
What was the name of the family you lived with?
McQueen.
And who was it who was living there?
Well, there was Mrs. McQueen, and there was Mrs. McQueen's mother, and Ronnie, and Bob. No, Bob wasn't there. Bob was dead, I think. Yes, because Bob was in the war. That was Mrs. McQueen's eldest boy, and he died of TB after the war. But I don't think he was there at the time, but I'm not quite sure. I just don't know when he died. And Jessie was about my age, and she had wonderful auburn hair. And whenever she went to the hairdressers, they said what wonderful hair she'd got. And when I went, they used to say what poor hair I'd got.
Did you have much of a social life in the big city?
Not in the city, no. My social life was my walking at the weekends. I did used to go walk, hiking it was called then, but I didn't like that word. It was a horrible word.
And who did you hike? Who did you ramble with?
Well, That was occasionally. I did stay in at the weekend here because we did have meetings of the Clarion Round Table, and that was how I met the boy Ingram that I saw later in Bonn, and we had. I used to, and of course before I went to. I think, it must have been afterwards. But I was very keen on walking, and that was my main thing. I did play tennis a bit, but not much. I was always a bit of a rabbit. And of course, we worked so late that I could never get off in time this is when I was at home, not when I was in Manchester. We worked so late that I could never get away. Of course, my parents used to let me go, but somehow I never seemed to get there in time to have any good practice. And we used to play on a hillside up at Marsden. You could never really. It was so windy that almost all the time that you could never really play proper tennis.
Did you have any money? Do you remember having?
Oh well, I from being 15 years old, I insisted on a dress allowance, and but Muriel wouldn't have a dress allowance, and she got much far better bargain in the way of the clothes she got. She got much better clothes than I did, but I liked my independence.
When did you finally qualify?
Oh, when I was 21. That was as early as I could. You couldn't take the exam before then, the final exam. And there were 3 girls of us that I knew of that took the exam, and I was the only one that got through first time. And there was and then I took a job as soon as I qualified, away from home, and there was a woman optician who came to interview us all at the School of Optics. We spent a fortnight at the School of Optics before the exam, just brushing up on the correspondence course, you see. And there were 3 girls of us there, and it was arranged that whoever got through the exam, that's how I know that the others didn't get through, would get in touch with this woman optician, and because she was wanting an assistant, you see, and I said I would go, and so I took this job in Hinckley, outside Leicester, and was there for 18 months. And then I was on holiday with my father at Caister, and he took me on one side and said, "Your mother's not well, you'll have to come home." And I think Mother had got very depressed because my sister, Muriel, had gone to Oxford, and she'd got a scholarship and went to Oxford, and I was away too, and they hadn't a great deal of social life, apart because they were so busy in the shop. We did have some friends at Crossleys, which was the man who I told you that was in the army, and we used to go up there on Sundays, and I remember hearing Caruso on a gramophone and thinking it was absolutely marvellous. They had a lot of. We used to have a sort of musical evening with the gramophone, and I shall never forget that, because it really was wonderful when you never heard anything. And when I was at Hinckley, I heard Clara Butt. She had a wonderful voice. I don't think there's ever been any contralto since who was as marvellous as she was. And I heard her sing Land of Hope and Glory, and it really was rather something. And she had a wonderful presence. She was really a statuesque person, and with a voice to match.
Say something about your activities in the early development of the youth hostels.
Oh, yes. Well, that was after I'd been to Germany, of course. I arranged this party. I'm getting a bit tired.
Right. Okay. Let's stop. It doesn't matter. We've done almost.
Actually, yeah. Do you want to do that again, Jeff? Put your hand on there. Yeah. It's all right. Just widen out.
Why do you need a hand? It's a cutaway, so if we want to edit it halfway through, like breaking off a sentence, it looks awkward if you see someone and then it cuts.
There are about 6 photographs that we need to just show. And if I just simply say who they are, how do you want? Do you want me to hold them up to the camera?
Yeah, I can. Get more on the same photo.
I'm wondering, this photograph here, we haven't actually been over who everybody is.
Mum knows.
Mum knows who everybody is.
Oh, yes, I know who they are.
Will that be enough?
That man above.
No, I don't think so. I think
The
I'll
man
have to.
above Auntie's mum's grandpa. So who's that? Are you on?
I'm just trying to give Laura a bit of light so she can just identify who's who.
Well, there's my lamp there.
Huh?
On Judith's side of the family.
Yes.
Not your side.
No. It's all right. It's all. I don't know any of these people. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't know these
I think that's my father.
That's your
there.
father. I'm sure that's your father. It's your
Yes.
father, your mother, your grandmother, aunt,
That's my cousin May,
cousin May.
Auntie Lorna, Uncle Dave, Auntie Nell, James, cousin James, Grandpa, and cousin Nell, and Lolly,
And
myself.
the smallest.
Yes, I was a baby.
Do you know this would have been taken at a photographers in Leeds, won't it?
Yes, it was because Uncle Dave was going to. It was going
to New Zealand.
New Zealand, you see.
Did he go straight to New Zealand, or did he go somewhere else first?
Oh, he went straight to New Zealand.
So you're not the cause of the photograph.
Oh no.
It wasn't a family photograph because of you.
No. No, it was because Uncle.
The big one, the tall one at the back, is Uncle David, who's,
Do you want to have a look at some other pictures? Just.
if I may say so.
Well, that was made out of a beautiful length of material that a friend of my mother's went to Japan, and he became a teacher of English in Japan, and he came home on a visit. He lived there and brought some beautiful things, and this material was this dress was made out of the material
Right.
that he brought.
Right. Yes. And here.
Oh, that I'm in a little amateur production of a little, I don't know what they call them. It was
Amateur theatricals or amateur.
well, it was a sort of musical, a little musical affair. It's called The Fisher Maid.
The Fisher Maid.
Pearl the Fisher Maid. That's
Pearl the Fisher Maid.
The leading lady.
and I was Pearl the Fisher Maid.
Right. And this is you having recovered from pneumonia.
Yes.
You're looking very healthy, Lorna.
Oh, I don't know. I think I look a bit yonderly.
You think you look younger. You're not at your best.
No.
Oh, you look healthy to me.
Mm.
We think you look like Ellie in that photograph.
Yes, I know your mother said that I look like Ellie. Well, Ellie's much better looking.
Oh no,
Yes,
no! Don't
she
say.
is.
Okay, we can.
She got Jude.
Right, this is number 1 photo, and this is the socialist holiday camp. Is that right?
Laura, what's the photo of? What's this photo of, Laura?
Lorna, what's this
What's this
photograph
photo
of?
If you want me to tell me,
Just
Just
tell
say
us
what
what
it
it is. That's all though. You just need to say what it is.
yes. Oh, this is a party on the Broads from Caister Holiday Camp. I think there's my father and myself. I don't know whether my sister's there or not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you see her?
This is number 2, and this is the family shop.
And where's that? Where was the shop?
In Southwick.
Southwick.
Yeah.
Southwick.
You've just had your hair cut off, haven't you?
This is
Oh,
just before,
just before
you
you've
had
had your
your
hair
treatment
cut
for
off.
pneumonia.
Yeah.
This is Lorna, aged 4.
Yes.
Okay. This is Roundhay.
Roundhay Park. This is the Clarion Vocal Union meeting on a Sunday afternoon to sing about 1901 in Leeds.
It says 1900 on the back of it. Okay, let's
Pause
just.
it and
There's loads.
do a couple of edits on that.
Yes. Judy asked why there are so
Tell
many
me.
men,
20 nil.
and the answer to that was, well, there always are more men than women in socialist organisations.
That's a bit more out of focus, isn't it? That's doing
Oh,
one
look,
from
here's the
him.
guy that's conductor.
There, let's have a bit of that.
Shall we
That's
just
nice.
pull? Oh no, hang on. Let's all just carry
That's nice.
this shot. There we go.
Do one of just the man for a couple
Okay,
of
I'll
seconds.
just pull. There's a conductor. Not saying about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we close
Right.
that.
Information from Mama because I didn't know about it. I don't know.
This is Grandpa Bailey and Grandma Bailey. They went to America in the 1860s, and Lorna's mother was born in America, in Ohio,
1875.
in 1875. But the family came back.
In 1877, because she was just 2 when they came back. Family group taken because Uncle Dave, on the back row, was going off to New Zealand, and that was the whole of the family at that time. There's except Uncle Charlie, he's not on. That's Auntie Nell's wife. There was Grandma and Grandpa, with me on Granny's lap in the middle, and Cousin May towards one side, and Cousin Lolly sitting in front of me, and Cousin Nell at the side, and James is the little boy, Cousin James, and my father is standing just behind May, Cousin May, and then Mother is next to him, and then Auntie Laura, and then I think it's Uncle Dave, and Auntie Nell, and young James, Cousin James. That's all, I think, isn't it? Oh, and Grandpa, of course, right next to Granny. As teacher of English at the university in Tokyo, I think. And he brought some beautiful things back with him. And that was a dress made out of some of the material he brought back.
Years old.
It's funny how on a photograph she sometimes looked older than ever she used to look in real life. She never really looked an old woman. And she does look an old woman there, I'm afraid. But it wouldn't be very long before she died. She'd be 75 there, I think.
She married for love?
Oh, indeed, yes. Why else? Oh, yes, there were several aspirants. They used to go, Granny and he used to go off on a holiday and have a really good holiday. Pardon?
A patent.
A patent?
He was an inventor.
Well, it's when you invent something and you patent it so that other people can't use it without paying you something.
Yeah, like us, like a half a day's training, you know, and we give you a good wad of money for it.
The department would rolling in it.
Get in touch with us, yeah. Because I mean, there are things that you can learn. I mean,
we
simply
could do something about like in-camera editing
as well.
rather than, because that's where it can be really valuable.
I
That
know,
sort of
even
knowledge
just
can be
things
really
about
valuable if you're not
just
doing
things
it
about how to do a shot. Because I mean, basically, what you do is if you want the toenails
His
to go
images. I mean, how do you?
Outwards.
You obviously like his work.
Just where the, probably just where there's most
Why?
pressure.
Well, because it is what Manchester was.
Dances with you.
What
Isn't
some of
it?
what
That's
those.
quite. I mean, that's interesting. You should say. I mean, do you find that he does recreate something, or he's creating something which does give a?
Oh, yes.
Oh, what's big stretching it? What were you laughing at?
Just you.
What did you do with the kittens then? I just gave them away. Did you?
No, it wasn't just giving away. You had